Welcome to Stanley, Scuba, Sailing, and Adventures. I'm Bill Stanley. Just over 70% of the Earth is water. I've always been drawn to the water for as long as I can remember. I started scuba diving as a teenager nearly 40 years ago. I started sailing as a young man, eventually taking many classes and certifications with the American Sailing Association. I also enjoy land-based adventure travel, from rivers and mountains to the desert. I believe that life is an adventure. It is what you make it. I hope you'll hit that subscribe button. Rum Rations, a quick one. Sailing is always a matter of weather windows, and all the old sayings are true. Boats and schedules, they just don't mix. I was looking to get out of the slip, and on this particular day it was blowing pretty good. The wind was blowing from the correct direction, at least for my intentions, but it was gusting probably 30 knots occasionally. That's just a little more than I like to deal with getting in and out of the slip. I'm by no means an expert, and I don't want to tear up my boat or anyone else's. So, I'd have to wait another day. Luckily, the forecast for the next day looked quite a bit better. There was a lull in the winds in the mid-afternoon, and the gusts were down to about 20 knots. Maria came down, and we got the boat out of the slip and made it out into the intercoastal to anchor out for the night. I knew we'd have a bit of wind that night with gusts about 25 knots. However, Rum Rations has some pretty serious ground tackle, and I knew that this anchorage had pretty good holding. We got anchored, and I quickly got the snubber on. The snubber takes the weight off of the windlass itself and puts it onto the cleats. I typically use a snubber every time I anchor, but on this occasion I wanted to get it on particularly quickly because the wind was already blowing pretty good by the time we dropped the anchor. We probably could have gone in a little further. There was a lot of water in the intercoastal at this point. And what I mean is the low tide was not quite as low as it usually is. There was quite a bit of water to deal with. We'd anchored in about 15 feet of water, then put out about 100 feet of chain. Actually, I think it was a little closer to 90. But still well over 5 to 1 and almost 7 to 1. Although it was quite windy, the temperature was very comfortable, and we settled in for what would be a beautiful sunset. The forecast for tomorrow was for mild winds, and I was hoping the red sunset was an indication that that forecast would be accurate. By next morning, the winds had died down quite a bit. I had my morning coffee at anchor, and we headed out late morning into the Atlantic. I'd recently removed the stack pack from the mainsail to have a new one made, and I'd been looking at the mainsail and the reefing points. My particular mainsail uses a method called slab reefing. It's a wonderful mainsail, and I had recently had it serviced, so every telltale was in place and it was ready to go. I had tied in the maximum number of reefs as I had been preparing to start solo sailing. Since the stack pack or sail cover had not been replaced yet, I had applied sail ties 5 across the mainsail. I had intended to remove those before we headed out to the open sea, but had forgotten.
were bouncing just a little bit as we got out into the Atlantic. Not a great deal, but enough that I still didn't feel like climbing up on top of the Bimini to untie all of the sail ties. As a result, we would just end up sailing on the jib. The winds were very light at first, so we were only doing about 2.5 knots. They did pick up over time, and on just the jib alone, we were doing 3.5 or 4 knots at one point. You could see the radio here in the top left hand of the screen. That's called the Mic 2, and that's an extension of the marine radio below that allows me to hear and make calls from the cockpit. A very important piece of equipment to have on the boat. Unfortunately, not all sailors have it, and not all folks in pleasure crafts out on the waters in Florida use the radio. There was a dredge and barge working just inside the inlet at Fort Pierce, and having the radio in the cockpit allowed me to communicate with them on our way in and our way out as they were turning the barge both points when we left and when we came back by coincidence. We had to head back as the weather for the next day was really rough. You can see here the wind had turned and was from the north. At this point I'm on foot and walked out on the south jetty. You can see the north jetty here, and the waves are actually completely covering parts of the north jetty at certain points. I typically leave the marine radio on at night, even when I'm in the marina safely in the slip. On this particular night, I heard several emergency calls to the Coast Guard and trouble with boats getting into the inlet. This section of the inlet I call the vortex of death. It's always rough, but on this particular day it really was rough. It was a good day to be in the marina. I was watching this osprey hunt fish and almost caught it making a dive into the water. But as you see here, I just got it when it was coming out. There's always lots to see in the marina. I always tend to look in the water. Seems we have a lot of baby barracuda right now in the marina. Here's a common snook. There are plenty of those as well. There are always lots of jacks and lots of crabs on the rocks. I've seen a lot of things in the marina. I've had dolphins swim right by the boat. I've had a large old manatee actually bump up against the boat. I've seen sea turtles, otters, lots of fish, lots of jacks, big schools of large jacks. Anyway, I always tend to keep an eye on the water when I'm going up and down the dock. It was a great visit with Rum Rations.
Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment.